All right, we are live.
All right. So, hi everybody. We're back. So, let me tell you what's going to be an issue today. The parents went out of town and they left Patty and I to house sit. The reason this is an issue is the first time we met, we talked for an hour and a half instead of the 45 minutes we were scheduled to talk. I will try to keep us on track. I apologize in advance. So again, we are at the Terraform plugin SDK office hours. Today it's just me and Patty. Before I let Patty jump in and introduce himself to those of you who have not experienced his greatness, I'm going to remind you my normal TLDRs. If you have questions or comments, you want to say something, just jump in the chat, have fun, ask whatever you want. But when you're asking whatever you want, be professional, be nice, and be welcoming. So TLDR, don't be rude. Just have fun and give me stuff to ask Patty that he probably can't answer. That's all I need is one of those kinds of questions. If you are not already aware of our guidelines or our code of conduct, I can't talk this morning. I will drink coffee in a second. You may go here. I have placed that link in the chat. Feel free. And I actually, while Patty is introducing himself, I'm going to switch over to the correct Zoom account. YouTube account. I'll be back.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name's Patty. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the engineering lead for the Terraform plugin SDK. Normally, we got my colleague, Katie Moe, joining these chats with us. Katie's unfortunately not able to be here today due to a very unusual and unforeseeable circumstance. But that's okay, because Tracy and I are going to hold down the fort, and it's going to be a good time. It just means that I am without adult supervision. And you all have to live with the consequences of that, I guess.
No. Oh, no. So what I told the rest of the world is that we would be talking about what did I say that we were going to be talking about today? Oh, design decisions and the way forward for the framework. Am I right?
Sounds good to me.
All right,
I can talk about that.
All right, let's go.
We can talk about that. So as you all know, or at least as some of you know, I hope, fingers crossed, we've been working on trying to figure out how to better enable provider developers with the Terraform plugin SDK and kind of what the future of that looks like, what some of the things that are difficult right now are, and how we can kind of make that a little bit better. We launched the Terraform plugin Go and Terraform plugin Mux libraries last year, which I'm super excited about. They offer like the first steps towards surfacing some of 0.12's features for the first time that providers haven't been able to take advantage of yet because the SDK didn't kind of give access to them. So I'm really excited about those releases, and Terraform plugin Mux is really, I think, a deceptively important module for us because previously you would end up doing provider release, or you would upgrade your provider to the newest SDK version all in one go. And that's super rough when you're someone like, AWS and you've got hundreds of resources and data sources. That's a heavy lift to kind of switch between versions. And that really constrained us in what we were able to do with the SDK because the upgrade pain was so much that we couldn't do things that were going to hurt provider developers, like that were going to be an unpleasant upgrade experience. So that wasn't, so that's kind of a struggle that we've been having, and Terraform plugin Mux kind of offers us a way out of it by letting you use multiple different SDKs in a single provider, which I'm really excited about. So we launched those. We've started working on other projects. We launched a community feedback issue for Terraform plugin log to kind of revamp the logging experience of working with Terraform providers. That actually closed a couple of weeks ago and has moved into an internal RFC stage. So we're kind of making some progress on that and getting that out the door. I'm very excited about that, bringing structured logging to Terraform providers, having, a little bit more control over what logs you're generating. And I actually just, Terraform 0.15 beta 2 just went out today with the ability to output JSON log format from Terraform. So now you can get log lines in JSON format that's parsable and filterable after the fact.
Did Katie talked about that in our last meeting, right? A lot. She gave up
yes.
a lot of. What I'm trying to say, people watching, is Katie talked about our logging also in the previous community hours. So if you want to get a little bit more about that, you can watch our previous stream. All right, sorry, go on.
Yes. No, you're good. I appreciate the call out because I'm glazing over our last glazing over. I don't glossing. Glossing's the word I'm looking for. Glossing over our last few streams here really quickly. But yes, the history of these office hours will kind of give you a little bit more background, a little bit more depth on all of these topics. So yeah, we've got the logging stuff going forward. Beta 2 for Terraform 0.15. I'm very excited about it. If y'all haven't tried it yet, you should definitely go out, give it a shot, download the beta, play around with it, give us some feedback. We'd really appreciate it. And you get to take advantage of that JSON output. It is worth noting, we're not guaranteeing anything about the JSON formatting being put out by those logs just yet. There will be tooling coming for parsing and working with it. But if you're like, I'm going to parse this JSON tooling, or I'm going to parse these JSON log lines with my own custom tooling, just know that they may break between versions of Terraform because we have not specified any like specific format or spec for that JSON yet. So yeah, we've been working on that. And so as Katie and I talked about in our last one, we've been really looking at, so what's the helper schema equivalent for plug and go for 0.12 native features and 0.12, we keep calling it the HCL2 native SDK is kind of how we've branded it internally. And what does that look like? How do we get from where we are to that point? And it's a really challenging project because we're trying to build abstractions on a really complex system. We're trying to build abstractions on it so that it's easy to consume and interface with, but will still meet the majority of provider developers' needs. And provider developers just have very diverse set of needs, and there's not a central repository of information about, here's what provider developers are trying to do with things. There's just a lot of information out there, and it's really hard to get to. So it's actually a really challenging prospect for us, is to design a solution that's going to be easy enough to use, powerful enough for most provider developers, and idiomatic and learnable enough that new people can approach the project and get onboarded very quickly. And so it's taking us a while. It's taking a lot of effort and time and research and debate and consideration on our part to kind of get this design nailed down. But I think it's really worth it because we're trying to build something that is going to last for years. The last SDK, I believe it's 7 years old in July. And so we're trying to build something that's going to have some longevity to it, that's going to be backwards compatible, that's going to let us, adapt and grow with Terraform while still maintaining abstractions on top of it. And that's a really hard design problem for us to solve. And as Katie talked about last time, what we're doing is we've really narrowed down to, we've gathered a list of like, here's a bunch of questions we need to answer. What does a provider look like? What does a resource look like? And we've started kind of researching and prototyping and discussing and trying to generate a shared collaborative vision internally in our team that our entire team owns. Because it's really easy for somebody to just kind of like go off in the woods in a cabin for like a month and just sit there and get to the heart of a problem and design a proposal around that, and then bring it back and just get review on their proposal. But at the end of the day, they're the person that owns that proposal.
Right.
So something we've been working and struggling on is trying to make sure that it's something that the entire team can own, making sure that it's, again, because we want it to last for years and we don't want a single person to be the resident expert on it. We all want to be the resident experts on it. So that's been an interesting challenge for us as well, given that, Katie's located in the UK. I'm located on the West Coast of the United States.
Right.
We don't have a whole lot of time zone overlap between us. And we've got managers and product managers spread throughout North America as well, who are also involved in this. So that's been fun. But the path forward is we're still trying our design. We'll do an RFC for it internally. But what we're really thinking is that we're going to build out this RFC of this design, have this idea of what we're going to be building with the framework. And then we're going to go out and start iterating on it, implementing it, trying it out, trying to implement providers with it, trying to get feedback from people on it. We might end up doing like an alpha release of it to try and get some more feedback on it, and then we'll launch it, where we'll have a big event and blogs and updates and things like that to kind of let people know that the new framework is ready to use.
Oh no.
I got notifications.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was like, you froze. What happened?
Oh no, my brain froze. My video setup did not freeze. My brain just froze for a minute there.
That was awesome. That was very
But
awesome.
that's our path forward, is we're really trying to do a lot of deep research and really understand the design space better, because the design space that provider developers are operating in is ill-defined and vast, and we need provider developers' help in understanding that design space and answering a bunch of ambiguous questions. I say ambiguous because I think all of the answers to those questions make sense to me. Like I could defend each and every one of those answers. For example, I think we talked the last time about structs and interfaces, and the idea of whether like a resource is a struct, like schema.resource, where you fill callbacks in as functions, as properties on the struct. Or whether it's an interface where you define a type for the resource and then provide methods on it to provide those callbacks. And I think both of those have really strong pros and cons to them. Like there are a lot of implications of that decision, but I think either decision is really kind of a valid decision. I think I've been quietly tweeting about random questions that I'm having in this design space and opening polls and being like, what was that, Tracy?
I was like, so that's where those have been coming from. I'm like, man, these seem awfully specific. Okay.
I'm just like, I've got, structs versus interfaces. Today was panics versus errors. And everyone's like, obviously don't panic. And I'm like, well, what about? And they're like, oh, I get, that is a hard one. But yeah, so I've been just kind of tweeting out polls and stuff like that. We're not designing by poll or anything here. Like that's not the idea, where it's like whatever gets the most votes is what we're gonna do. I'm largely just trying to get people with loud opinions to wade into my mentions and yell at me, which happens for me every other time I tweet. And like the one time I want people's opinions, silence. I get crickets. So yeah. I'm going to share a link.
Yeah, I'm going to share a link to your Twitter, actually.
I don't know if that's a good idea, but
fine, I'll take it out.
No, it's fine. It's fine. I'm just teasing that my Twitter is I have strong opinions. But yeah, the my Twitter is not an official Terraform resource, by the way. But yeah, no, I think what we're trying to do right now is still just gathering up opinions and figuring out how to corral opinions in such a way that we can shake them and a design will fall out, is I think the best way of describing it. And we're getting close. We're narrowing it down to, we figured out kind of what the important questions to us are, which is like, how are we interacting with config and state, which I believe Katie last time showed Katie state, which definitely is going to be the name of it in the release. I refuse to ship anything that does not include a Katie state.
Nice.
So I think we talked about that, and I think that's a big one, right? Because one of the core things that a provider is doing is taking values from configuration and values from state, and then performing operations with them. Right? What were you saying, Tracy? Sorry.
Oh no, I was agreeing. I was agreeing with you. I'm not on mute this time, and I keep forgetting how familiar I am with talking with you. So I'm in our normal cadence of yeah, sure. And then I agree. So I'm gonna put myself back on mute. Sorry, viewers.
No, please, by all means, continue. I'm sure people don't want to just like hear me. I just want to make sure I'm not talking over you.
I was gonna ask, what's
Yeah.
the best? When you were talking earlier about how you don't want to just leave the design and everything else up to just your team, what's the best way people can like contribute or offer feedback on the design?
That's a great question, and I'm actually going to share my screen really quick because I've got a link. This is. I need to stress the fact that I slapped this together, and this is not like an official. I feel so like anxious that people are going to be like, oh, this is how HashiCorp does user studies or things. And like, we have user research teams here who are amazing and very good at their jobs, and they do not produce artifacts that look like what I'm about to share with you. So just, I need to be very clear that this is the fact that this looks like it was done by an amateur was because I did it, and not because like our product managers or our user research teams don't know how to gather feedback. They're very good at it.
Got it.
But sorry, what were you going to say, Tracy?
No, I know what the problem is. Here we go. All right, you all are gonna see the mic. I hope my boss doesn't fuss at me about the mic being on the screen. But here we go. I'm gonna start talking directly in the mic so you can hear what I'm saying. I was about to say, once you put it on the screen, I will copy down the URL so I can pop it in the chat.
Awesome. I just want to make sure that for the recording, it's there too for the people that can't catch it live.
Okay.
That's why I wanted to share it. But it's this tf.hashi.link/SDK/COH community office hours -framework-survey. You'll get a Google form no, please don't talk to me right now, Google Assistant. You'll get a Google form that's going to ask you to fill in some information, fill in as much or as little of it as you'd like. There are things where it's like, hey, show us what you think a resource should look like. What's it look like to implement a resource in your brain? If you could have any interface in the world for implementing a resource, what does it look like? Same with a provider. And then it's got a bunch of different things about errors. It's got, and panics. It's got, a bunch of different questions there where it's multiple choice. Answer any or all of those that you have any opinion on, and that's all very helpful to me and my team. If you are okay with us reaching out to you about your feedback following submitting it, then check the box for that at the bottom. But yeah, I'm going to leave that up for just a few minutes, but that's very helpful to us if people don't mind filling out a survey on that and just kind of giving us their feedback. Other than that, if you have strong feelings, if you have opinions, if you have like coherent design visions that you would like to share with us, the Discuss forum is something that we monitor, and it actually, every time people open a new topic, we get a Slack notification about it. Sharing them in there is great. We would love to see them in there. And that would also really help us with our design, 'cause I'll literally like reference those as we're building design and talking about trade-offs, and this is what people are expecting from us.
I just popped the link for the survey in the chat for our viewers. I also just popped the link, I'll say placed this time. Placed the link in the chat for the Discuss forum, and he is not kidding. They are very, very active in the forum. So if you have any questions, even not around design, please place them at the Discuss forum, and they will address them as soon as they can.
I'm gonna stop sharing my screen now because I think people have had enough time to see this link.
I do have a question for you from the chat.
Okay, hit me.
Tamika wants to know, what type of mic do you have? What's your mic setup?
I'm using a Blue Yeti mic with a whatever mic stand that Yeti sells. I think it's the third version of whatever the Yeti mic stand is, from Blue. And it's being held up by a Elgato multi-mount flex arm, is I think the name of it. And I needed to get like a little adapter to make the threading and connectors all work, but it worked out in the end. So that's what I got. And I've got a Yato pop filter. I don't know.
It works.
It was a $10 pop filter I found on Amazon. And I was like, sure, that'll do.
I can show you the flex arm he has. I have one. I'm not using all the pieces of it, so I can show you what that looks like the next time we talk for my setup, because I use a flex arm also. The question I have that is not directly related to design that I kind of brought up to you before we got on here is about the provider, building out a provider, where I was telling you when I was in the middle of building it with Rosemary last week and we were working through it, the data source kept trying to phone home to the registry. And I initially couldn't figure that out. And you brought up something, what is it? The provider dev overrides, which since I was going by the scaffolding, I don't even think I realized that was there. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I can. Let me just get this link somewhere. I'm gonna share a link to that now, and I'm just gonna keep using this one slide as my link scratchpad slide. So I'm gonna share that. So there's a link to the documentation on it. There we go, center it a little better. That's a link to the documentation for it. It's I want to say it was introduced in Terraform 0.14. So the history here is Terraform 0.12 and below, I believe. You would just place the provider binary. You would, write your provider binary, you would go build it, you would get like a binary from it, and you would put that into one of a few different locations on your disk, and that was all you had to do.
Okay.
It was something like you put it next to the Terraform binary, or you put it in like dot terraform.d slash
plugin slash plugins or something like that.
Yeah, it was a simple path. It was really easy to do. And you would that's how it worked before Terraform 0.13. In Terraform 0.13, we added provider source so that you can have registry.terraform.io/hashicorp/random or whatever. It no longer was just random, and that gave the ability for us to have namespace providers in the registry. And is the beginning of when providers in the registry kind of started. And that's a very exciting enhancement, and I think that's wonderful and is long overdue. The work that was done on that by the core team is amazing, but the ability to install a local provider, because it needs the information about that namespace and all of that, it became much trickier to place it in the right folder locally. And we also introduced lock files because, versions could change and get republished and stuff like that. And it was a little bit less, I shouldn't say less of a trusted, it was a little bit less of a controlled environment than the way we were doing things before, because people other than us could publish releases. And so we introduced lock files that would kind of keep track of the hash of the provider binary that you were running. And so Terraform 0.13, like the sum of all of this, the effect of it was that Terraform 0.13 was much harder to develop a provider locally with, because you would need to constantly be moving files around into very weird folder architectures that had versions on them and things like that were unintuitive and no one quite knew what to do with it. And you had to keep rerunning Terraform in it to regenerate hashes and stuff like that. And it was just a mess. And I want to say on the Plug and Go live stream you did with us in November, whenever that was, there are several times where you watch me, go install and then forget to run Terraform in it and, run into an error. And so this provider dev overrides was added, I want to say, in Terraform 0.14. And what it does is it allows you to define a provider folder that will override the installation source for a specific provider, and you define it in your .terraform.rc file, which is a weird place to put it, but that's basically in your home directory .terraform.rc. There's a Terraform block in it, and there's a provider overrides basically block inside that, and you specify the address, if you will, of the provider, and then you tell it where to look for the binaries for that. And what that does is it means you don't need to run Terraform in it anymore. It will automatically just keep pointing to to that location for the binary on disk. So you don't run Terraform in it for anything anymore. It doesn't worry about the hashes. It doesn't check the registry. It doesn't even need to exist on the registry. It just uses the local provider for that. And so that's the recommended way to go about installing providers locally for development purposes.
That's an hour of my life that I will never get back because I was still trying to do it the old way. And so, yeah, there was a lot of install. Oh crap, I got to back all the way out to the right folder. Okay, wait a minute. So yes, I have notes over here now, so thank you for that.
Yes, that was a thing that we didn't think would be as frustrating as it turned out to be in 013 and then resolved in 014. But yeah, it does make life much easier. Speaking as someone who writes provider code, that does. I'm very grateful to the core team for the turnaround time they had on that and how quickly they kind of fixed that experience.
And someone else is following up on that. And so the other thing I mentioned was the fact that we now have to use the local instead of doing it the old way. So Jackie was asking, does Patty have any tips for building a new provider? Like, what are things to keep in mind as you start that can cause it for fluffle later on? Well, new plugin. Sorry, she had tea today instead of coffee, and she's regretting that.
Um, Things to keep in mind. I would start from make sure you're starting from the latest available SDK. Some people don't realize there's a V2 and just import SDK. Going with V2 gives you the benefits. It means you don't have to go through all the upgrading stuff. The other thing is I would it's important to get to something that will do something quickly, like that you can run Terraform apply and get that dopamine hit from being like, I did it, I made a thing work. And that's always a really cool feeling. I've been developing Terraform providers for 4 years now. And it's still a really cool feeling when I'm like, I did a thing, it worked. So I would say prioritize getting to that point as quickly as you can. But once you're there, try and retrace your steps a little bit and really understand what's going on and get a solid grounding in the system that you're operating in. And that's really difficult to do, and that's something that my team and the education team are really looking into, how to better surface some of this information. But like for me, what really helped as a provider developer was hearing Martin, the engineering lead for the core team, describe the purpose of a provider and like why do we even have providers, what's the job of a provider, like conceptually. And what he told me was that the point of a provider is that a Terraform has an idea. Terraform's got a preconceived notion of what an API is supposed to look like and how it's supposed to work, and it's a REST-y idea. There are resources, they have the same schema throughout. You can create, read, update, destroy them, and that anything you write to the API is going to be readable back from the API. And that one API call, or that one each resource can be created with a single API call and updated with a single API call. Like these are all ideas that Terraform has about what an API is. And APIs all have ideas about what they are.
Right.
And these visions don't necessarily match. Sometimes for very good reasons. Like you don't want to, when a user writes a password into an API, you don't want to return the password from the API. That's not great API design. But that's what Terraform expects to happen. And so the job of a provider is to sit in between these two different ideas of what an API is and teach them how to accept the other one's differences of opinion there and kind of make them connect. And that's the job of a provider, is to be the glue between these two different ideas. And I think understanding kind of like the high level concepts like that is the quickest shortcut I know to developing good stable providers that will not hurt later. The other thing I will mention is the Terraform core repo has a document in it called the resource lifecycle something or other, object resource lifecycle, resource object lifecycle, something like that, that describes the requirements the protocol has for what gets set in state, what comes out of state, all of that kind of stuff, when things are allowed to change. The SDK does not do a good job of following these currently and does not give you the ability to follow them currently. That's not a sorry, I got distracted again. the Terraform, the SDK doesn't give you the information you need to kind of follow all of these rules right now. That's one of the reasons we're trying to kind of fix this and why we've spent the last year or so trying to kind of rebuild the Terraform provider developer experiences to kind of make the SDK better behaved and guide you better in this. But if you can keep track of what those requirements are, and you can kind of keep them in mind and see how Terraform kind of works with all of that, then you'll be really well positioned for the future. And as we roll out new SDKs and new tooling and stuff like that, you're already aligned with all of the stuff that we're doing. You're not going to be able to do a perfect job of it, but it is helpful to kind of keep in mind. And then finally, the only other thing is testing. Writing acceptance tests, writing good acceptance tests is really great. And one of the things that I told a provider developer in the last few months that they were like, oh, I wish you would put that in your documentation, which I'm working on it. It's a work in progress. But one of the things I told them was the point of acceptance testing is really to verify three things are all in agreement: that the config, the state, and the API all agree on what a value for a specific attribute is. Like everyone's in agreement there. That's why we do acceptance testing, to make sure that the right value ends up in state, that the value is being read correctly from config, and that the API is changed according to the user's wishes.
Right.
And there's the hack that we use to kind of do that right now is using the import state verify of the acceptance tests, on the assumption that if you build the config properly in state, and things get written to the state properly, you won't get a diff there. And if you use import state diff or import state verify properly, it'll verify that the state and the API are in agreement, because it'll read from the API into the state. And so that kind of gives you all three: is you create it, you read it from state, and if it doesn't diff, you're good. And then you run import state verify as the next step, and that kind of helps you out there. The Google provider kind of pioneered this, and so if you're looking for an example of what I'm talking about, it's all over all of their resource tests. But having good acceptance tests for your resources is really going to make your life easier as new SDK upgrades come out, as you're trying to change things. They really give you the confidence to be able to release your provider and not have user bugs come down the line. Does that all make sense? That was a very long answer and very impractical, and I'm sorry.
It was not impractical. That was actually very awesome and succinct. You gave very concrete points. I'm very proud of you, sir.
I just wish I could be like, look at this page on the website, read the website page.
We have all of this here.
We're not there yet. We're still maturing in that part of our efforts there. And I apologize for that.
No, you're fine. I have, and I don't think a lot, like I've said before, we have our teams are great in what we produce, but we are mostly small. So there are priorities, and that's not one of them, which I will actually circle back around to your point, Jackie. I can absolutely say that dopamine hit of seeing that work. So I was so used to having had done this the old way, it didn't occur to me that the new way wouldn't work really well with the old way. So I ended up pairing an extra hour trying to get it to work, and that was like not a good feeling. But by Friday, I had something that worked. Like I could actually go out, pull what I wanted, and see it. And it was literally just one little thing. But that one little thing was like, oh, this thing, I built it. Oh, well, hell, the damn thing might actually work. Look at that. So like it starts small. And I think you're a lot like me, Jackie, in that we see things and we get so excited. We're like, well, we need at least this much to get done, not knowing that this much to get done is a lot of work that we don't really have the bandwidth for. So work on that one small thing, like say, hey, in my case, it was, hey, I want this article, or I want to pull in all of this, my articles for this thing. And I actually saw my article from this thing. So that's my proof of, okay, I'm on the right track for something that's working. I might actually hit my goal. And so, yeah, I'll be working on that again this week. The other thing I was going to say was, I was just saying our teams are small. They do realize that, and this particular, oh, thank you. I didn't know which one of the links to do and I couldn't find it. Thank you, HashiCorp, for posting that. Thank you, Kristen. That's the one I was looking for and I couldn't find. I appreciate it. There's a second link for the resource lifecycle. It's the resource instance change lifecycle documentation that Patty was talking about. the HashiCorp handle just posted that in the chat. So please go read that. It's got way more information than the one that I linked to from Terraform.io. But in that regard, our teams, and I've said this before, it's not a bad thing. I tend to, you see me on office hours and HashiCorp lives with teams that I genuinely, not that I don't like most of our teams, or if not all of our teams at the company, but like I work with those that either viewers don't know about, like product delivery. Plugin SDK, probably no one even realized that that was a thing. But I genuinely like the people on the team. And so I'm comfortable asking some questions that I might not ask on other things. What I'm going to say is Plugin SDK team, small. You've seen the entire team on our lives and on our HashiCorp Live. So when you hear me yelling documentation counts, the person that said, hey, well, why don't you put that in the documentation? We will absolutely take the PR for that documentation. If you see something that, hey, the scaffolding didn't address something that you kind of think it should, put in the PR or even put in the issue and say, hey, I know this didn't happen. Do you think we could do this? If you don't want to put it in the repo, go to discuss, add it on discuss, say, what do you all think about this? Would it be okay if I submitted an issue for this? Because this is the confusion that I had. So absolutely, I'm literally getting a shirt that says documentation counts. Like, open source is not easy. You need help sometimes, and you all inform the things that we do. So if you have ideas, share them. Like, we're not going to bite your head off. Somebody from HashiTalks did something and I went behind in a side channel and submitted it to the team that they did the talk on, and their PR is now merged. Like, it's a thing. So do the thing. I'm going to shut up now. That was a soapbox I didn't know I had. So yeah, Patty, you got anything else you want to talk about?
The only other thing I want to talk about is you're like, yeah, let's talk about the dopamine hit. I'm gonna Patty's pro tips for that quick dopamine hit. Start with a data source. Start with the data source. You implement the one read method in the schema and you're done. So that's the quickest way to a win there. Resources. After you do a data source, do your first resource. Resources have a lot of options on them and a lot of things that you can do. I'm going to tell you, just make all of your fields force new and do a create, a read, and a destroy. You get out of doing update if you make everything force new. So just make it work on the create one first and let everything force new and it's fine. That's my hot take for how to get it. You can add import later. You can add validation later. You can add all that stuff later. That's all nice to haves. But if you're really after that one dopamine hit, do a data source first. You'll get something very quickly that you can see in Terraform state. And the other thing is, resources. Start with the simplest possible version of the resource and then move on from there. Yeah, those are my things there. As for documentation, totally agree. Documentation does matter. I think one of the things that's holding Terraform Plug and Go back the most right now is that I just did not prioritize documenting that with the team. And that was for a very good reason, in that we made that trade-off consciously. We were like, okay, we know people can't use this until we document it, but we can either spend our time fixing all of our documentation for all the stuff we've got, or we can kind of replace some of the stuff that we would be documenting anyway, and then document the new state of the world. And I think we're leaning a little bit heavier towards the latter option there right now, just because we are building things so quickly. Documentation gets out of date quickly. But again, there are two of us, and we've got something like 4 projects in the year. So we're struggling a little bit there. But if you are having trouble, if you are trying to onboard, if things aren't clear to you, you don't understand, my first suggestion would be ask about it and discuss. And my second is, if there's documentation that you're like, I need this as documentation, or I want to see this as documentation, even if you don't know how to write the documentation yourself, or you don't want to PR it, documentation issues I will take all day, every day. Just literally, here's in my head right now, fixing documentation is a project, a big thing where we devote like a few months to, let's figure out how we're gonna architect the documentation and what documentation we need and how to go about writing it the best way possible and all of that. But like, if there's a quick win where you need me to spend an hour writing a page on terraform.io, that's something that we can quickly slot in on a Friday when we're not doing anything else. So that's also really helpful for me. It's just the process of going, like, I would write that documentation in between doing other things, but that the amount of time it would take me to write that is the amount of time I would spend assessing the documentation to even figure out what's next to write right now. So it's really helpful if you're missing documentation or you need something to open an issue for it, and we'll get it tracked and we'll get it into our roadmap that way. That's my documentation soapbox. I don't mean to be like, we're going to do all the fun parts of open source projects where we write all the code and we're going to throw documentation over the wall for all of you people to implement it for us. But pointing out our weak spots is a thing that's really helpful to me personally, at least.
I do have a question that if I don't ask it, she'll knock me upside the head on outside of the meeting. Tam wants to know, what is a well-written provider, or at least one well-written provider that you know of that to follow as an example, outside of just using the scaffolding? And I've got Bobby's link, or at least the old one. So I didn't know if you wanted to use that one or like you wanted to use something else for Bobby Tables.
Yeah, I mean, I think Bobby did a great job on his provider. I think usually we end up pointing people to specific resources in the big three. I'm biased because I worked on the Google provider basically since its inception. The Google provider, I think, is great. They really, what I think the Google provider did really well is they managed to keep all of their code pretty much at the same quality level and the same freshness level. Like, all of their code is basically like, there's a lot of providers have stratified code where it's like, here's the newest code that we touched that's updated to all of the latest best practices and all of that stuff. But then like you find resources that haven't been touched in 3 years that are using the best practices from 3 years ago, which we've learned a lot since then. So that's not the most up-to-date kind of best patterns or best practices there. So I really like that about Google. The drawback of Google is it is a generated provider. So some of the stuff in there is going to look funky or look confusing just because it's built as a general case out of generated code and it's not handwritten. They tried really hard to make it basically one-to-one with handwritten code. I think it's still really readable, but there are patterns in there that don't make sense for every provider. So that's one. The Azure provider does some really interesting stuff. Like, the Azure provider's got a lot of really interesting patterns in it, and they've kind of built their own framework on top of the SDK inside the Azure provider, which I think is really neat. And so if you're looking for information on like how you could do something like that, the Azure provider is one I would look at. The AWS provider is just got every example under the sun. We use the AWS provider's acceptance testing for the SDK before we ship major releases, because we know if it passes the AWS provider, nobody else is going to have weird edge cases for us. Like, there's just so many resources, and they're also different, all following different patterns and stuff like that. But that is the drawback, is it's one of those providers where there's just physically too much code in there to keep it all updated with the latest and greatest patterns. So you'll just have to pay attention to, when that pattern was implemented to see how recent it is. The Kubernetes, if you're looking for Terraform Plug and Go, the Kubernetes Alpha provider is just top notch. It's one of the best providers out there I've seen for Plug and Go. And Alex, the engineering lead for the Kubernetes Alpha provider, worked like hand in hand with me while developing Plug and Go. Their work made Plug and Go so much better, and like really informed a lot of our decisions there. And they're doing a bunch of really neat stuff in Kubernetes Alpha and really pushing Plug and Go to the limits of what it can do and really taking advantage of everything it has to offer. And then let's see, I'm sure there are others that I'm not calling out or thinking of here. Our standard library providers, generally pretty good. There are a couple of them that for legacy reasons do things you shouldn't do, like the HTTP provider doesn't have an underscore in the data source, which you should do that. Please always do provider name underscore resource name. Yeah, that would be my hot take there. It's really hard to be like, here's one provider that's got all of the best practices
Yeah.
that's also really well maintained, because best practices are just changing so rapidly
Yep.
at this point as we try and kind of build a stable foundation on top of 0.12. Yeah, and find new workarounds for limitations in the SDK as it exists today.
All right.
Yeah.
I think I got. All right. So on top of that, in the
Yes.
chat, I have the GCP provider, I have the Azure provider, I have the AWS provider, I have the Kate's Alpha provider, and Kristen gave us the link for the. I deleted the old link that I had that was not the correct link for resource lifecycle. Please follow the one that the HashiCorp handle posted. And I don't see any more initial questions. Did you have anything else you wanted to talk about?
The one provider that I will call out is the that I forgot to call out. There's the HashiCups provider, the learn.hashicorp.com. That's the one that we're going to continue. I've actually got recurring meetings now with the team that maintains that one to make sure it's getting updated with the latest and greatest and the best practices. And like we're building Terraform plug and log in part of our release strategy for that. Like it's not, the project isn't considered done until HashiCups has been updated to use that project now. So that's really going to be one of our main, like, here's the best practice of communication, or here's how we're going to communicate patterns and best practices. That's one of the things that I'm trying to focus heavily on, is the HashiCups provider for that.
Nice.
Yeah.
Let me see. While you're thinking of other stuff, I'll go on and plug the stuff we have coming up because it's a list. It's a nice list. While Patty is going, let's see. Community wise, we had a really great session. It was a sizable session, but it was a great session. It was a HashiCorp Live this morning that was around configuring Nomad to run Boundary, and that was Rob and Eric. So that should still be up on the Twitch stream. And then if you don't get a chance to look at it over there, it should be on YouTube within the next few days. Tomorrow we've got HashiCorp Live EMEA edition. That'll be Terraforming with Freeman. So all of you that have been following along with that every morning at 7 a.m. Eastern, Alexandra's going to keep going forward in learning Terraform and the stuff that goes along with it. Tomorrow afternoon, the North America edition is fixing a Terraform module for Nomad on Azure, part 1. And let's see, what else do we have? The next community hours. So we've got, I think this is Wednesday, not Tuesday. I almost said the wrong thing. So Wednesday, there's a Nomad community office hour. So that'll be Jackie. And then you'll see me next Thursday around the same time for the Terraform language server team. So you'll get to meet Audrey and we'll talk to her a little bit about what in the heck was going. What'll be at, oh, I'm sorry. So I'm sorry. The EMEA edition of HashiCorp Live tomorrow will be 8 a.m. Eastern. So we can keep it at 1. Oh, never mind. It's in the chat. All right. It'll be at 8 a.m. Eastern tomorrow. Apologies. Next week I'll be talking to Audrey about the language server and like what was behind the scenes and the architecture and how they got that going on VS Code. And I don't think anybody's ever had a chance to talk to her about that. So I'm kind of interested in seeing what's going on.
Such a deceptively amazing project.
It is.
You're gonna have such a good time. Oh, it's such an amazing project. It just, yeah, that team's doing amazing work.
Yeah, so that's another one of those teams where you're kind of like, there was a language server team. Well, yes. So for those of you that don't know, they're technically part of the same team that Patty's part of, but it's kind of split in two. It's kind of weird, but it kind of works. So yeah, we'll talk to Audrey about that next week. And the reason that it's at 8 a.m. tomorrow for HashiCorp Live is because of the weird daylight savings thing that's going on between us and across the pond. Anything else? I enjoyed this and I got good notes.
Good time.
I'm going to make sure I make everything force new and implement the CRUD part of CRUD on Friday when I work on the resource part of that. You got anything else? This was nice.
This was a good time. Thanks so much for sitting and chatting with me. The mods were asleep and we kind of ran wild, but it was a good time. Yeah, I don't think I have anything else. Just want to plug the survey again. You know, it really helps us to just kind of, we're trying to operate on the principle of least surprise here and, you know, build a build a library that will do what people expect it to do, and that is not surprising the first time you approach it.
Right.
I think one of the things about the plugin SDK that, you know, the two of us and all the other professional provider developers out there kind of take for granted after a certain amount of time is that there's a bunch of context you need to use that thing correctly. Like, there's so much weird stuff you need to learn. And we're really trying to kind of cut down on that this time around with the framework. We're trying to reduce the cognitive load and reduce the barrier to entry, so that provider developers can get up and running more quickly, so that we don't have a section of our office hours where we talk about what's the quickest way to get started, because it should be quick to get started with this. You should get that dopamine hit really quickly and easily, and really early on in the process without a whole lot of work. And so key to that, though, is understanding what people expect and what makes sense to people. And so your feedback through that form is really helpful. Talking to us and discuss is really helpful. Sharing your ideas with us. I think I can't promise anything yet because it's still an active discussion with the team, but I'm hoping how we end up releasing the framework is not the first time you see it, it's already a finalized API. I'm hoping how it is we'll have a proposal for you, and you can weigh in and comment on it and let us know what you think and what you like and don't like about it. And if we can, we'll tweak it to kind of to match better. And we'll take advantage of that early kind of period to make some breaking changes to make it fit better with people's expectations. Because I don't think we're going to get it all right the first time. We're trying really hard to. We're going to get as much right the first time as we can, but I do think that this is going to be an iterative process. I just want to smush the 6 years of iteration that Terraform plugin SDK did for V1 and V2 down into a few months of iteration this time, and see if we can get all the benefit the same way. But that's my closing thought is, we love your feedback. Please send it our way. Whether it's the forum, whether it's an issue, whether it's discuss, let us know what you think. It's really helpful for us.
That sounds like a good way for us to, Mr. Rogers, our way on out of here. All right. Thanks everybody for joining us. Tam has no more questions. Jackie has no more questions. So we will see you all